and 25% of revenue. 25 is on the high end, but this could be true for the AEC industry as well. Many people on the outside would have trouble sort of imagining a quarter of a company's revenue going toward acquiring customers, but there is a lot of energy in that, obviously. So on this slide, you see some information that came out of Harvard about marketing mix and the P's, or the factors of marketing. These are all important factors to an owner choosing who they do business with. We'll expand a little there. In addition to looking forward and outward, I'd be remiss if I didn't say marketing. In marketing, it's also important to look inward if you're an owner or key personnel. You already know that. It's critical to establish objectives and KPIs, performance indicators. Using the SMART acronym helps some folks with that objective, specific, measurable, achievable, relevant, time-bound. It's also important to identify and analyze your context and your competition, but the internal analysis includes some things like a SWOT analysis, or strengths, weakness, opportunity, threats. The point is that we don't get to implement those things unless we acquire a customer, and it's every bit as significant. Retention is every bit as significant and important as KPIs. And we tend to think or talk a little more about things like, how big it is, or how much concrete went into it, or how many hours, or how many months it took to design, or how many, the what and the how. And so it's important to also focus on this why. So, the trick question is, asking a firm or asking people in a firm, who's in business development and marketing. And I've done that before, in person, and there'll be, some large firms and some small firms, and a few people raise their hands and they have a title of business development, person. And but it's a trick question because everybody in the firm is should be involved in marketing and business development. So even the people that aren't pure business development, they should be attuned to that. Fortunately, many companies have really high level, people that are doing that at the highest levels. I know as an owner, I was often on the receiving end, and I'm not here to share about those marketing things, but I am here to help your business marketing efforts. Sounds a little like a contradiction, but I want to help you market. So many of us have seen Shark Tank, and I like that analogy. They often ask the entrepreneur in Shark Tank that is seeking their assistance and their funding, what their CAC, what their customer acquisition cost is. And in many cases, that cost is significant, more than the cost of the product could be. It holds true that most expensive customer to acquire is a new customer. So on Shark Tank, those customer acquisition costs can be all those things you see listed on the right, everything from marketing down to responding to RFQs, lunch and learns, meetings, all those kinds of things. And so the typical related follow-up question on Shark Tank is, it has to do with how many of the customers you have are repeat customers, and what is the average sales to those customers. So why is that important? Return customers have little to no customer acquisition costs. So again, I'm sure I'm not telling you anything you don't know. Return customers have very little expense in that regard, and all that huge marketing effort and expense can be avoided the next time. That would be preferable, obviously. So this applies to companies like yours. So how do you best leverage every one of those marketing efforts? You've successfully acquired a customer. What can you do to earn more work and exist, from an existing customer, rather than trying to, find an entirely new one? Okay, so we're all in business development and marketing. The primary goal here is to explore how best to build trust with the owner. So as we know, trust is fundamental to any relationship, and I'm sure you're working on that. One example of a transactional sort of trust-based relationship that I like to bring up is the one between a potential, patient and a doctor. So if we have a choice when we're picking a doctor or maybe considering a treatment, it'd be beneficial to ask yourself some questions, right? Do I Do I trust her? Does she listen to me? Does she understand me? Is she knowledgeable and competent? Does she communicate in a way that I understand? Is she bringing her A game? Does she care about my needs? Is she tailoring my treatment specifically to me? Those are all kind of trust building questions. And it may be a little easier to kind of relate back to a doctor or a treatment. But when we believe that virtually all certified doctors are qualified, and not unlike architects, a person might believe that. The answer to those questions could affect the level of trust and confidence you have. And so for an owner, the likelihood of working with an architect or you're working with a doctor might really come down to that. So, okay, so that's some scaffolding to build upon, um, and uh, and maybe in non-marketing terms. So we'll explore that to how to get a higher level of success. So the other little point I want to make here is that the last 5% of a project, whether it's design or construction, I I don't know about you, but for me, it often feels like it represents a much higher percentage of effort on that project than 5%. And we know that 5% is also at the end of a phase or at the end of a project. And it can be a big reason an owner would or wouldn't want to work with this team again. And so it's no time to lose focus is at the end. Again, understanding there's a huge effort associated with marketing. Let's get another one. And let's do that from an owner's perspective. I like to say it's not rocket science, it's harder, right? So you think about developing a rocket, they get lots of prototypes and trials and component research and all that. And eventually the rocket, years later goes in space or it goes up and it comes right back down. And I can't remember a design project that I ever had that was like that there were prototypes and all that. So it is. I think it's harder. So underneath and behind the owner's stated goals, as we talked about there can be unwritten assumptions and goals and perspectives that the owner has. It's my goal to help your perspective and understanding to determine what those might be, those hidden sort of needs, and to communicate that. So um, so I want you to have the keys to better understanding the owner perspective and get those repeat customers. So we'll go through these sort of 7 things, and they're all important. The first one might be, though, the most powerful, and that's understanding and communicating the why. Speaking the owner's language, like sometimes when I say that, I hear, oh, great, the owner speaks a different language. Well, from my perspective, yes, sort of. More on that in a minute. We already established that the best customer is the repeat customer, so we can all talk at length, as I mentioned earlier, about how and what of stuff. It took 18 months, is $20 million, is 10,000 cubic yards of concrete, it's 40 foot tall, it had state of the art this or that. Those things are important, but when you think about it, we all do that, and your competition does that. So how are you different? Today's about to differentiate yourself, how to stand out. So, and I want to acknowledge that, I can't talk with one voice about an owner because owners are multi-headed beasts. Sometimes if it's a committee or a group or multiple representatives, they all have different perspectives. So there's no one size fits all, and there's no predicting exactly how that will go. But on the law of averages, hopefully you can narrow down who your audience is. And it's important to understand that audience. So um, you may have a representative on a project design that's their primary purpose is to ensure, I come from a university, so we had a universal access kind of person. And um, they were looking out for folks that were differently abled, so this person could see the design and construction as enabling or disabling. That was pretty much, their perspective and their entire sort of reason for being there. So you could have a representative that's more focused on maintenance or how hard it will be or won't be to repair something, or will they have the parts, or will they have the technology or the technicians available to serve that. There's no, I think my point is that there's no shortcut to making sure you understand who you're talking to in each instance And certainly it's important to consider and address those folks and their perspectives. But then too, there are representatives that are the reason for the project, the ones that need the new building or the renovation, or the ones that define success more broadly than a restroom or a ramp or an air conditioner or an elevator. On the surface, they may want more new space, but the underlying reason could be, as I mentioned earlier, recruitment, rating, status, accreditation, things like that. So these folks are the ones that are likely to be primary in working with you. You can evaluate that yourself. They're likely to be evaluating your performance and sitting on selection and search committees. And they may also be the folks that might write recommendations for your firm after the work is completed. So these are the more complex representatives, often with more complex needs and goals. We're going to focus on those today. So one example I give is that the shortlisted firms, if there is a shortlist, if it's that kind of a process, and that's an easy example, the shortlisted firms probably can all design or build the thing, right? They all can. So what gives a firm an edge? What gives your firm an edge? It's like picking a doctor when it's clear that you care about the why. You first care about the why, then I can more readily trust you with the what and the how, because you probably all know the what and the how. But this firm really gets the why, and they're really like they're going to make sure that all the what and the how stuff um, solves the why. So in our example of building trust, like the doctor, the how and the what does not fully achieve that trust and those assurances and that comfort. So talking about the why is speaking the owner's language. A team that can first understand the why and achieve the owner's goals, both written and unwritten, um, shows that they care about the intents behind the project. So research, my advice would be research, determine, and articulate the project's terms in the why, and don't stop doing that at any point. Keep doing that, because that could evolve, or there could be more evidence as to what that is. So I want to show this marketing video from Skanska, or a piece of it. Skanska, is a multinational, huge construction firm and financing firm and all that. And so I just happened upon this, and I think it has, some marketing values and jargon, but it also cuts right to the core of the why for the owners. So I'm not sure I haven't tried this before, but I'm going to try to run a piece of this video. And as you see this piece, see if, if you feel like an owner, and see how they're talking about what they do, and see what might exude confidence or trust. Okay, let's see if this will work. Hopefully you're seeing that video.
Hello, and welcome to Earth. This is where we live.
No, Peter, I think you need to reshare your screen.
Okay.
Of our lives.
So
what do we do?
If it opened in a new window, you'll have to share that window.
Okay, thanks for that. Hang on just a moment, and we'll see if I can share. Learn something new. And the video. Are we seeing it now? It's not running yet, but do you see the video?
Yes.
Okay. And here we go.
Hello, and welcome to Earth. This is where we live, and this is the raw material of our lives. So what do we do with it? Well, as we try to protect it, we also transform it into whatever makes our lives better. Come with me and I'll show you what I mean. At Skanska, we build things. Now, we are one of the world's major construction companies, and you could define what we do in strictly technical terms, but that wouldn't be the whole picture. Take this bridge, for example. We built it to connect Sweden and Denmark. Now, it might look like just another bridge, and in a sense, you'd be right, but there's more to this than meets the eye, because this bridge is, more than anything else, about bringing two countries closer together, It's about people whose lives have changed dramatically and forever. And that's basically what we do. We change people's lives, and we do it in the most sustainable way possible. Before this bridge was built, there were concerns that the marine life might suffer, but looking at the end result, that simply isn't the case. Blue mussels are now thriving on the below sea structures, and a man-made island that was part of the project is now home to about 300 different plants and 13 different species of birds. And here we are.
Okay, let's see now if I can reshare my PowerPoint. Okay, are we seeing the PowerPoint again? I think so.
Yep.
Okay, thanks. I'll just say it, like, she didn't talk about the concrete and the steel and the magnificent bridge that they built. She talked about bringing two countries closer together, which in this case, this bridge was not just a transportation kind of thing. It was about connecting two economies and two cultures. And hopefully you felt that too, that it was this was more about the owner's why. We went right to that. And most contractors would talk about how phenomenal it was they built this bridge and how they did it in a time frame and what the materials were and what some of the manufactured items they would talk about the what and the how. This was, I think, a good example of just when I saw that, I thought that's brilliant. From an owner's perspective, that's brilliant that she's talking about the bridge as a connector and not really as a bridge. Okay. So another point to make is that it can erode confidence with an owner if different people in a company or a team have a different core goals or mission objectives. So, again, I mentioned the performance metrics for each person or each role or each job. Each person may be different, but it's important, regardless of those performance, their individual performance, that the team speak with one voice. And humor me if you've heard this, but there's an example that kind of resonates with me that in the early 1960s, when we were in the space race, the outer space race, and the USSR had already sent their first satellite and an astronaut or cosmonaut into space. The USA was behind in that race, if we call it a race. And JFK, John F. Kennedy, proclaimed that we would put a person on the moon in that decade, which did happen. But not too long after he made the proclamation, he visited NASA Space Center in 1962. And President Kennedy noticed a janitor sweeping. He said, this may be the part you've heard, like sweeping the floor. And he interrupted his tour and he walked over to the man and he said, hi, I'm Jack Kennedy. What do you do here? Like the guy didn't know that was the president. And he said, well, Mr. President, I'm helping put a man on the moon. To a lot of people, the NASA janitor was just cleaning a building, but in the larger sort of story unfolding around him, he was helping to make history, and the janitor got that. He understood the vision and his part in it, and he communicated it. The U.S. wants to put a man on the moon. So, that's like really fundamental, like that's a person on the team that could have just said, well, what I do is clean bathrooms or I mop floors or I whatever. And then looking at the why, coming back to the why behind the mission. Yeah, the mission was to put a man on the moon, and that was what NASA was doing. But um, but not just putting a person on the moon. Like what was the why behind that? And you might think, well, and I don't know, but I would assume some of it was national pride, some of it was unity in the country, some of it was to create trust in leadership and in government and in democracy. So, if those things can be found, understood, and communicated back, is certainly a strong builder of trust. So, maintaining an owner's perspective, considers the owner's sort of mission impacts as well. So, you can't just think of like I was on the University of Arizona campus, and some folks would come in and kind of not realize that the U of A campus wasn't a construction project. It was a campus, and they'd forget that in their delivery and in the way they talked about things. I think, most talented architects don't ever forget that, but it's important to be proactive in understanding the impacts of what you're working on and how it impacts the larger operation of whatever your client is doing. So it may also be tempting to let an owner step away as you complete. We were talking about that 5%, but it could be a longer duration. Sometimes depending on the owner, it might feel like they're kind of getting in the way a little bit, or they're challenging things that shouldn't be challenged, or you fill in the blanks. But I'd suggest you never let an owner step away. An engaged owner is one that has buy-in, that appreciates the degree of difficulty that you're facing, and is more understanding when something isn't perfect. And let's face it, it's never perfect. So, and in that process, it's important to help the owner look good and to communicate for that, and for you to communicate the project and to help them communicate the project to their constituents, their supervisors, their whoever their audience is, that you're not just communicating with them, but you're helping them communicate with those aspects, and helping them succeed is another goal in the project. So there are lots of ways to do that. There can be periodical sort of emails, there can be newsletters, there can be various updates that are written in a way to not just communicate to the owner, but help the owner communicate to their, I'll say, constituents. In construction, project tours are really important, and that needs to be aided by your construction partner. But I would encourage and facilitate them often. Some projects are more in that market than others, but that helps everyone be proud of the efforts and the efforts of the partners, and share the progress and the complexity and the excitement. And I think that pays back big time with owners. This is, the owner's culture, as I mentioned. Maybe during construction, we think of a project sort of being within its sight fence, but we know that projects impact beyond that. If there's an existing something you're attaching to, or a complex, or a campus, or a medical building, or a school, or a commercial complex, there's impacts to those existing ongoing operations. And it's really important to mitigate that, and to know and to verbalize to the owner that the operation is not a construction project, and that the construction folks are guests and in that area, and mitigating those impacts must be ongoing and understood. So consider that in your design and in your phasing plans, and how you communicate those things. Their mission is, education or healthcare or technology, and it isn't necessarily construction. So again, I would imagine most of you are very attuned to that, but I just want to emphasize that is an owner's perspective, or at least it was mine. So, keep it a priority, and keep mitigation of those impacts a priority. So, business owners, like some of you or many of you, want to know everything and for things to be predictable. So surprises are the enemy. They can affect the three-legged stool: budget, schedule, and scope. So in a project, it's likely there are going to be some unknowns and things that weren't fully predicted. So part of the communication with the owner should be issues that you've planned for. Let them know what you've planned for, and the contingencies that you've built in. And then when a problem surfaces, inform the owner. Be honest and upfront, and that will build their confidence that you are transparent. Also try to bring solutions, of course, and plans to mitigate and address the issue. But for some, that's kind of counterintuitive. And I hope for you it's not. That's a huge confidence builder and trust builder with an owner. So we're seeking ways to differentiate your firm, not just building a building, but building a relationship, helping the owner know they selected the right team. It's important in that process for you, your team, and your partners to understand that it's not a race to see who finishes first. that everyone must cross the finish line together. Contractor, the architect, the subs, the contractors, the sub consultants, everyone must cross that finish line together, and the owner needs to see that. And if someone falls down, we're all going to stop and pick that person up. So you want a culture where that's known, that's an important factor to the success of the project, that everyone wins. Okay, so we're about to wrap up. Certainly, being the best partner is getting the job done successfully and in unison. So we can't afford to let the budget and schedule metrics get in the way of getting another one. We must build trust and confidence. On a search committee, that's often what makes the difference. People are all talented and qualified and have built things like this and designed things like this before. But the one that you feel the most comfortable with, like in picking that doctor, is the one that starts to come to the top in the way people interpret the scoring criteria. I just use that as an example. In other ways, there aren't RFQs or there aren't score sheets, but an owner has to feel that same level of comfort. So keeping in mind, this is our goal. That to build trust and confidence really is the path, and to help the owner achieve their why, or to address their why. Let that guide your actions, whether you're responding to an RFQ or just interviewing with an owner or a search committee, or in your day-to-day communications throughout the project all the way through the end. You can give your team a winning edge and win more work and more repeat work, and hopefully get awesome references. I'm going to wrap up now. Let's see. So remember to implement and share these keys with your team. We can make this available for you as well. Focus on the why, earn an edge. And I'll just wrap up with this is my information. And I'm happy to address questions at this point. So let me stop